So I'm going to share my screen. I've got a quick presentation and then we can open it up. And then I will talk more specifically about the workshop series and how, what the plan is and see what people suggest. I know there were a lot of suggestions that were put on the Google form, but let's see. Okay. Okay, I hope you guys can see my slides. Anyone who wants to turn on their camera is very welcome to do that. It might make it a little bit easier, but it's up to you. So this is what the schedule is for today's session. I hope there's a lot of kids, and actually it might be kind of good if I can ask if how many people are on here are high school students, how many are parents? Can you raise your hand if you're a high school student that's on here? Okay, I guess all parents. Interesting. Okay. All right. All right. Oh, so there are some kids. Okay. Well, so this is just took a while to find the hands, I guess. All right. Well, so this is just some initial considerations because I had mentioned, I was an admissions officer at Rice University at some time ago, and then I've done a lot of, as a community service, been involved in like just counseling and stuff like that, especially as an attorney. But I'll just kind of go through some initial considerations, some of the exams, the details, the significance of each one, what I believe is an ideal exam schedule, having done this for 30-something years, the breakdown of each exam, and then college admissions and extracurricular activities and how to really structure them or think about them, and then we'll just open it up for questions. So some of the initial considerations is that, whether you're in 7th grade or 9th grade, 10th grade onwards, the next 6 to 8 years are really about collecting the tools for life, right? The way that college admissions here works is that, whatever they can experience, whatever they can get involved with, whatever they can figure out about their strengths and weaknesses, what they like and what they don't like, that's the goal, right? Is collect the tools for life so that once they graduate from college, they have a very good idea as to what they need to do. The goal in high school, having dealt with high schools for students for such a long time, the goal really is maximizing benefit for the least amount of effort. especially in our Fremont schools, and actually Bay Area schools in general, there's so much going on with the APs and extracurriculars that kids are involved with, is that you can't try to do everything. Your goal is what can give you the maximum benefit for the least amount of effort, right? In order to get you to where you want. And the third thing is that we know what colleges are looking for, right? The question is, what do you need to do to get there? So knowing where you want to go or what you might want to do, you just want to work backwards and create a plan for yourself from 7th, 8th, 9th grade onwards, in terms of what would look good. What is an ideal student for when you apply to colleges, no matter which college it is that you're going to. Now, first I'll talk about the exams. So I think I may have mentioned that, while I was at Rice, I was an admissions officer. I have been involved in SAT and ACT, PSAT stuff since 1991. I had taught for a company in Texas for about 15 years for these exams. I know the exams really well. These are the 4 main exams that need to be done in college for college admissions. One is the PSAT, which I think some of our kids took recently. There's the SAT, there's the ACT, and then there's the AP exams. I'll take you through each one. The PSAT, as the kids that just took it probably know, is that it's basically just a mini SAT. In fact, for almost, even till now, the PSAT basically just takes an old SAT exam, they shorten it, and they give it for the purpose of the scholarship. So PSAT is not a required exam for college admissions. It's a scholarship-based exam. If you do really well on the PSAT in 9th grade, you're recognized across the California. You're invited to apply for the National Merit Scholarship. And then based on your application and based on what your background is, you go from a semifinalist to a finalist to a scholar. Now that semifinalist status, just getting qualified for the scholarship, holds a lot of weight in college admissions. For example, USC, University of Southern California, will actually give students a 50% tuition waiver just based on that national merit semifinalist status. And PSAT is done twice in high school, once in 10th grade for practice, and then 11th grade is the real exam. That's the score that actually goes on to determine whether they're going to invite you to apply for the scholarship or not. Like the SAT, the PSAT has a reading, a writing, and a math section. There's no essay on the PSAT. And similar to the SAT, the scoring is out of, there's a reading, writing section and a math section. And it's out of 1520, 760 for the reading, writing, at 760 for the math. And the total time is about 3 hours. There's I guess, other versions of this exam, the PSAT 8-9, PSAT 10, and those are really just kind of practice stuff. They don't actually count towards the scholarship. At any point, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. But the scholarship that I mentioned, it's called the NMSQT, the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. And this is the top 0.5% of every, the junior year's PSAT. So whatever you score on that, the PSAT that you take in junior year, it's the top 0.5% that determines whether you're going to get invited to apply for the scholarship or not. The students who will qualify are considered semifinalists, and then, like I said, they're invited to apply. There's an application process where they look at your extracurricular, they look at what you've been involved with, your grades, and then you go from a semifinalist to a finalist to eventually a scholar. Now, the semifinalist status, you don't find out until September of your senior year. And so that's really what determines, or that's really what helps you in college admissions, just that part of it. The rest of it is just kind of added bonus. The second exam is the SAT exam that you have to think about. And, for the most part, I mean, COVID has kind of thrown a wrench into a lot of this stuff, but for the most part, for most of the competitive colleges, one or the other is required or highly recommended. There's a lot of schools that went test optional, and we'll come to that here in a second. But the basic breakdowns between the SAT and the ACT are the SAT has a reading, writing, and math section. It's out of 1600, 800 for the reading, writing section, 800 for the math. The total time is 3 hours. There used to be an essay section. It's no longer on the SAT. The ACT, on the other hand, it's very similar. It's reading, writing, math, and science. And the SAT actually changed in 2016. It changed in 2016. And actually the SAT actually became more like the ACT. And I'll tell you why that matters in a little bit. But the ACT has reading, writing, math, and science. It does have an optional essay section, which for a lot of the competitive schools that do require the ACT, they actually require the essay as well. It's not really optional for them. The scores are out of 36. So reading, English, math, and science are all subsections. Whatever score you get out of 36 is averaged to give you an ACT composite score. And similar to the SAT, it's about 3 hours. The essay adds about 40 minutes to it. Now, whether you should take the SAT or why should you still take the SAT? One thing that has really come very clear during the whole COVID thing is that, admissions is really, really competitive. And without objective measures like the SAT or ACT or GPA, right, which really got screwed up by a lot of the kids during that 1 year of distance learning, that admissions without those objective factors becomes very just up in the air. I mean, it's very unpredictable. And that's what we saw is that the year, for those kids who had to go through a year of distance learning, that the number of people that got into just even the UCs was, I mean, we had really well-qualified kids who just didn't get into a single UC because the admissions were just so subjective. And so that's what a lot of the top schools are realizing is that without objective measures to compare a student from a competitive school to a non-competitive school, someone who's the kid of like presidents of some company versus kids whose parents work in 9-to-5 jobs, comparing kids like that across various spectrums becomes very difficult when you don't have objective measures. And so that's why you see a lot of schools that are actually moving away and now back to more of, the less of the test optional stuff There's quite a few schools that do it still, but kids and schools have found it to be very, very difficult to do that. I mean, if you look at UCLA before COVID, the year in 2018, actually UCLA, the average number of applications they were getting in a year was 110 to 120,000 applications. It went up during the whole COVID thing because people didn't have a lot of these restrictions anymore. You could apply to wherever you wanted to apply. And so then the percentage of kids getting into schools like that went down. But then the other thing that, like, for example, schools like UCLA and others that were already getting a lot of applications noticed is that it's virtually impossible to go through all of these applications in a 3-month window and look at them in the detail that possibly you might need to look at them in. As the perceived admission standards dropped, more students were applying to top schools, and whereas they thought that it would be quite the opposite, it was a little overwhelming. A lot of what they're also finding is that during the whole COVID thing, and even afterwards, is that the people in some of the top schools, even if they were test optional, 50 to 70% of the kids who got into those programs in the subsequent years actually had submitted an SAT or ACT score. And then it just shows the commitment. And then there's other things actually based on the SAT. I think some people have their hand raised. I don't know if that was from before or if someone has.
Yeah, and there's also a question in the chat, Raki.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sounds good. Sure, whoever has, I think SY, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, so mainly I'm little not clear on the part when you said the kids who are studying in the like high rated schools versus the low rated school. So that part I'm little not clear. Could you repeat on that area?
Oh, yeah, so basically what happened during the whole, what happened with college admissions is that, without objective criteria like an SAT score or the GPA, right, which was messed up that one year, what happens is that, it's very difficult to compare someone who goes to, let's say, Mission or Irvington to like a Fresno school, right, where, maybe you may have a lot more restrictions on which APs you can take or how many APs you can take or access to classes, right? Or the quality of teachers, where those subjective things or those variable things are so high, the variability is so high, it becomes very difficult to compare without like an SAT score, which is uniform across all schools, right? And so what was happening, I guess, just to put it into context, is that, I'll tell you what happened at Rice, for example. And this happens at Stanford, it happens at all major universities, that they will take, they'll take your SAT score and they'll take your GPA. This was before COVID, right? COVID kind of changed a lot of things, but before that, they would take your SAT and they'd put your GPA and they'd put it into a formula. If your application came up with a number that's above the threshold that they've set, only then does it go into the next level of screening. So when you take,
they're not going to look for the school profile, because based on the school profile, each school is different and their principles and regulations are completely different from the other schools. So are they not going to look into that, or are they going to consider before, like, for the threshold calculation itself?
To some extent. I mean, I'll tell you, like at Rice, for example, when we would be going through applications, and I have one of my best friends was an admissions officer at Berkeley. In fact, I was hoping that she would join me today, but she had some family emergency or whatever. But what happens in a lot of these is that if they have knowledge about the schools or the environment, then that can be a factor in a lot of this stuff, right? But it's not necessarily a factor. Right? At some level, they want to kind of transcend a lot of that stuff and have more holistic view of the students. So the school that they go to or how competitive the school is only one factor in the whole thing, to be honest. And so that's why, like, if we look at, for example, Fremont schools, I mean, Fremont schools compared to like Cupertino or San Ramon or Evergreen for that matter, I mean, the access to classes is so different across all these schools. And then on top of it, they're being compared to kids from Basis or Harker, right? Basis has APs are being taken from 8th grade onwards, right? And so, all of that is, will be taken into account. But, there's many factors in the whole college admissions process. And at some level, you have to be able to give the students access to things that put them on the same level playing field, if that makes any sense.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think did you have a question? Why you? No. Okay. All right. So, and then there's
before you go on, so a couple of the questions in the chat. The PSAT exams are given in which grades? 10th and 11th, is that correct?
That's right. And so 9th is, there are schools that will let, kids take it in 9th grade as an extra practice shot. A lot of schools, the Fremont schools weren't allowing it, but a lot of schools do allow them to do that. You can take it, in other words, in 9th grade as practice if your school will allow it.
And then I think you're going to address this in a subsequent slide. Which test should the student take, SAT or ACT? I believe you're going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay, and then somebody else asked, why are the universities making the SATs optional? What are the other objective tests that are going to be considered? I knew that quite a few universities have reverted back to requiring SATs and ACTs. Yeah,
because it was just, the college admissions process was a nightmare. I'll tell you, like I said, I've been involved in college admissions stuff for 30 years, and I've never seen I started teaching for a company in Houston in 1991, and I saw admissions through that whole thing. We do it as a community service. We have a group of us that do it, not as much anymore, but we did. And so especially the year after COVID, there were at least 8 to 10 parents that called me crying. That was a really bad year to begin with, because their kids didn't get into a single UC. We had kids who had SATs of 1560. One of the top school students, this was a Milpitas High School student, who didn't get into a single UC, right? So the SAT thing, making it test optional is, in theory, it sounds really great because you're helping the disadvantaged kids, but you're really hurting the kids who want to go to college. And, simply because of whatever factors they were looking at, but it really became very, very difficult. And the admissions, the quality of education, the quality of admissions in many of these schools really dropped. In fact, there was an article recently in Wall Street Journal that made exactly that point, is that the quality of education and the quality of students actually will drop if you don't look at these factors that create normalize the admissions process, basically. So the question of whether to take the SAT or ACT, there's so many factors. What do they want to go? Where do they want to go? What do they want to do? And I'll get into that a little bit later on. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of schools are reverting back to it, to requiring it, because it was just too difficult. And as a student who wants to go to college and who's pretty serious about education, it's something that should be considered. It's very risky to not do it, basically. Now, because of the UC thing, and if you look at the history of the SAT, since 1991, when I started, getting involved in a lot of this stuff, in 1991 till now, they've had this would be the fourth major change in the SAT. They had a change in 1994, 2005, 2016, and now their fourth major change is going to be in 2024. It'll start in March of 2024. It'll start with the PSAT next year in 2023. And whenever there's been a major change in the SAT, 94, 2005, 2016, there's always 1 or 2 classes that have a significant advantage, right? And I think this year, 10th graders definitely will have an advantage. And I'll tell you why in a second. And 9th graders may have an advantage if you plan early. And basically what that means is that whenever they change the SAT, schools will allow kids to do both the old and the new form of the SAT as kind of and then you can decide which to submit. And so, 10th graders, in 10th graders, 2023, 2024, 10th graders will be 11th graders by then. And so they really have that year for admissions. Most schools will allow them to submit either, and so they should take advantage of that. The digital SAT is, in terms of Content, it's going to be pretty much the same. There are minor changes, which I can go through in a second, but it'll continue to be taken at school. It will be taken on a computer or a laptop. They will have fixed dates, but those will be determined by the schools, and it'll be a shorter exam. So it's generally going to be about 2 hours versus a little bit more than 3 hours. The two major changes are they're going to allow calculators on the full math section. And the second thing is, which I think is a very interesting thing, and I'll just kind of elaborate. If you look at before 1994 till now, the biggest change in the SAT has been the length of the critical reading passages. I think that tells you something about what's happening with kids today. But before 1994, all of the exams in the 80s, they were very long, thick reading, right? Questions were a little bit more analytical, and that changed in 1994 to a little shorter, more questions, more in order. In 2005, they took off the vocabulary part of this, they took off the vocabulary part of it and made the passages even shorter. Now, on this change in 2024, one of the biggest changes is that they're going to have very short reading passages with only one question each, which will be very interesting as to how they'll do that. But that's what the plan is. They are starting the digital format next year for international students. Anyone outside of the United States will be able to take the digital thing. I think they're doing it to kind of test out the model. And then for everyone in the United States, will start in 2024. And the whole goal was that they, the UCs, they need to bring the UCs back into this whole fold. In fact, this is actually the change in 2005 was also because of the UCs. The UCs had threatened to pull out from accepting the SAT in 2003. And because of that, they announced the change in 2005. And eventually UCs came back and accepted their new form. So I imagine that this is also very similar to what's going to happen then. So these are the exam dates. The PSATs are only given once a year in October. SAT and ACT are given 7 times a year. SAT is given in March, May, June in the spring, August, October, November, and December. ACT is also given 7 times, February, April, June, July, September, October, and December. The ACT, July ACT is not given in California, but it's given in neighboring states for whatever reason. And you'll notice that some of them are asterisked. Those are good months to plan around. And they're good months for a couple of reasons, but the main reason is those months are the months where they will allow you to buy your test booklet and see exactly what questions you missed. So especially kids who are taking it early, like in 10th grade or in the beginning of 11th grade, and they're shooting for a pretty high score, those are good initial months to take it, because scoring is generally better in those months to begin with, but you can actually see exactly what you missed and figure out why you missed it for the next time that you take it. And most people take the SAT and ACT 2 to 4 times. But before you go in and take an SAT anytime, you should always know what you're going to score before you actually take it. So any questions on this before I go on to the next slide? Okay, so now this question about whether to take the SAT or to take the ACT is a big question, right? So if you've already decided you're going to take one, I'll tell you what my thoughts are on both exams, and then it's really then at that point it's kind of an individual decision. But the SAT and PSAT, for that matter, are considered more strategy-based exams. The ACT is considered more of a knowledge-based exam. So on the SAT, like if you look at the critical reading, which is more strategic reading to begin with, and the math and the writing, they're less about time management or concept heavy. It's more about strategic application. Whereas the ACT is lots of questions, less time per question. It's very time management heavy. I mean, it's very much like you have to be able to do these questions really fast. The questions on the ACT are very deceptive because individual questions tend to be much easier, right? But there's so many of them that ultimately, if you look at a kid's SAT and ACT score, they're generally pretty consistent. like I rarely do I find that if someone has not done any preparation for either one, that their scores will be radically different. They're generally pretty consistent. It's just that kids find the ACT to be easier than the SAT, though I don't think that's actually true. I think that ACT scores, like I said, are generally pretty consistent with what your SAT is, because while the questions on the ACT are easier, there's just so many of them, so kids don't finish them easily. But having said that, in 2016, when they changed the SAT, the math and the writing on the SAT became exactly like the math and the writing on the ACT in terms of content and format. The critic reading on the SAT is very different than the reading comprehension ACT. ACT reading is kind of like the school stuff that they read, right? Read it, comprehend it, tell me what it says. The SAT reading is more strategic. It's about knowing what to read, when not what not to read, right? Not making assumptions, focusing only on what they say. And so it's not, like I said, it's just not as straightforward as the ACT. So now, having said that, right, the relative differences between the two, what I've found is that kids who start early on the ACT tend to get burnt out very quickly, because it's a very tedious exam. It's a very boring exam. It takes so much time. It's draining. But kids who start with the SAT early, like in 9th and 10th grade, tend to find it more like a game, and they can keep their motivation or momentum or focus longer. So in other words, if a kid is starting in 9th and 10th grade to prepare for any of these exams, SAT is a much better exam to start with early. ACT, they lose focus and they stop practicing. ACT is last minute stuff. ACT is probably maybe a little bit better if a child can stay focused and do things fast. So, you know, I just, I feel that, you know, on exams like this, it's better to start early and it's better to start with the SAT, because not only because of the relative differences between the two exams, but also because kids have to do the PSAT in 9th and 10th grade, right? And then, you know, having done the strategy of the SAT and practiced on it, it's a very good lead into the ACT. And you'll see the exam schedule I've created. It's based on that idea on how to maximize your ACT score or SAT score accordingly. So I'm going to skip this slide for 1 second and come to this. So the schedule, you know, so 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, you know, 9th, if the school allow PSAT practice in 9th grade, October is great because it gives you an idea as to how they perform under pressure, how they perform in a kind of a testing environment to see where their weaknesses are. And then they have some, you know, a couple of years to focus on them. 10th grade PSAT practice, they should treat it like the real exam and, you know, go in as if, you know, this was it, right? Because in 11th grade PSAT, they get one shot. That's it. They either get the score they need or they don't get it. And then 10th grade also, you know, APs in May are very important if the school will allow. 11th is when everything happens. And so, you know, 11th is probably one of the hardest years in high school to begin with, primarily because that's the year that most schools will even allow you to do APs. So the AP, the course load is definitely much harder, but also that's when you do a lot of your exams as well. And so, you know, an ideal schedule is that August of 11th grade is a good time to take the SAT. And though it's not one of the months where you can actually get your test booklet back, if you remember, I told you the months that you can order your test booklet, you need it to understand whether you tend to get nervous, whether you're overcomplicating things from, you know, where you're practicing, and to set you up for the PSAT. October of 11th grade, that PSAT, in my opinion, having you know, seen this for such a long time, I think the PSAT is probably way more important than the SAT or ACT for that matter. And so, you know, the October PSAT is really what kids should be preparing for beforehand. And then if the PSAT goes well, the SAT goes well as well. December is a good time to take the ACT. And, you know, to transition from the SAT, PSAT into the ACT is much, much easier than going the other way around. To go from a knowledge-based thing to strategy is much harder. Strategy to knowledge is much easier, and it kind of lends to itself much, much better. I've seen lots of perfect scores on the ACT after a kid is prepared for the SAT, primarily because of this relative difference between the two. And then May of 11th grade are the APs. And then, if they need to, hopefully, they don't leave any of the exams until 12th grade, but if they need to, then August SAT and September ACT are good exams. But having said that, you can take the SAT or ACT up until December of your 12th grade, and it'll still get considered in college admissions. Applications are generally due October, November, December. So early admissions is October and November. Regular admissions is December. And I'll get to that here in a second. So real quick, before we go to AP exams, any questions on this schedule? Okay, so now AP exams. On the AP exams, I know that AP, the sign up for a lot of that is happening now at Irvington. But AP exams are, the first thing I want to mention is that AP exams are not college admission tools, which means that, they're generally, they're not a requirement for college admissions, and they're not necessarily an initial factor in college admissions. So in other words, and I'll get to this a little bit, I'll expand on this a little bit more later on, but college admissions, this is how Rice did it, Berkeley, all the UCs, for the most part, but all the Ivy Leagues actually for sure do this, is that there's two levels of screening for any major university. There's two levels of screening. The first level of screening, like I mentioned earlier, is that they'll take your objective numbers, right? They'll take your SAT score and they'll take your GPA, and they put it into a formula, and based on the number for your application, they decide whether it's going to go on to the next level of screening. If you don't have the numbers for them to justify them spending the time on your application, they don't. You're not going on to the next level of screening. So the first level is, should I even look at this application? The second level of screening are the factors that determine whether you're actually going to get in or not. So for example, whether you've taken challenging classes, the number of APs, like 3 to 5 is generally a good number for college admission to look competitive. How have you performed in those classes, your extracurricular activities, how involved you've been, the leadership and communication and all that you've developed. All of those type of things are what go into the second level of screening. And APs is actually one of the factors there. So in other words, APs won't get you considered by a school. They're a factor that can get you into a school based on which ones you've taken, or and how you've performed on them. But they generally cover about 30 topics in arts, English, history, math, sciences, world languages. They're college level. They're meant to test college level understanding of certain subjects. And so for that matter, because of that, they will generally be the criteria that helps you decide whether you have to take a certain subject in college or not, right? So like, for example, when I was in high school, I, for example, I took AP Calculus, AB and BC, and I didn't have to take a year of calculus at UT Austin. So I did my undergrad from UT Austin, and I did my master's from Rice. So AP world history, that was one less year of history that you had to do. AP language, and then they give you credit for that level of, depending on your score, they give you credit for that in college. And the scores are from 1 to 5. And most universities will give you an A and credit if you have a 5. A 4 is a B in credit, and 3 is just credit in order to place out of that class in college. AP exams are 3 hours long. Half is multiple choice and half is free response. So yeah, so those are the APs. Yeah, Jigar?
So what do you mean by A and credit? I'm not sure I understand. When you say they get A and credit, B and credit, can you just go deeper into that? Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, like like, so for example, when I took AP Calculus BC, right, or in high school, I got a 5 on the AP exam, which means that in the year of calculus that I would take in college, they put, I got credit for taking calculus on my UT transcript, and they put a grade of A next to that.
Understood.
Right, and so a 4 would be, you get credit plus a B, a grade of B for that class, for that credit. And then if you got a 3, it was just credit.
Okay. And so what, how does it make a difference?
In terms of your GPA when you graduate from college.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you just get credit, say you got 3 and just got credit, what does it, I thought that means that you are not taking the class. So now you got the credit means you are not taking the class in college, but you don't have the grade associated with it. So
That's right. That's
your
right.
GPA kind of goes down because of that.
No, it's a weighted average, so then it's not weighted into the GPA.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So AP credit can't hurt you. It can only help you, basically.
So Rocky, I have a follow-up question on that.
Sure.
So not all colleges do that, right?
That's right.
Because
Not all
certain colleges will have a limit of how many AP credits you can get. And also, if you say you take science APs and you do well, but you're going into a science or engineering major, chances are you're going to have to take that freshman level class again because you will need that strong foundation.
That's absolutely right. And I think a lot of the California schools, for whatever reason, are very restrictive. When I grew up in Texas, and so there, especially, when I graduated, it was pretty lenient in terms of what they gave you credit for. I mean, I started as like a second semester sophomore when I started college, only because I got credit for so much. And I think a lot of those restrictions, because of the quality of education from high school to high school, they don't do it as much anymore. But many schools do it. It's just based on your major, they may restrict it a little bit. And you can check, like if you go to the Berkeley website or LA or whatever, they'll tell you, what you can get credit for based on what exam and what score. But that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, so are students who get a 3 on an AP at a disadvantage compared to somebody who got a 4 or 5?
I mean, not necessarily. You still get credit. I mean,
Like, does it affect the admissions process?
Mm,
If all things considered equal.
well, I think it's a factor that, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I mean, APs are generally not a college admission tool so much as, so the fact that you took it is a plus factor, right?
Okay.
That you got a 3 is maybe, as opposed to getting a 1 or 2, which basically means you wasted a year of a hard class. But yeah, it depends, I think, on really what school it is and what major it is as to whether it's going to hurt you or help you, I'd say. But a 3, I don't think, I mean, it doesn't look good, but it doesn't look bad either. And it's kind of a hard question. It depends on the
one other question while we are on the AP subject. I see, I hear parents with kids taking like 8 or 9 APs versus, let's say, if my kid wants to just take 3 or 4, is there going to be like a number of APs that is going to affect overall in the secondary level of admissions process?
Yeah, I mean, in APs, there's this whole law of diminishing returns, right? So 3 to 5 APs is actually ideal, right? Any more than 5 APs, I really, they don't help very much. I mean, it'll help you in terms of what credit you get in college, maybe, right? But in the whole college admissions process, because APs aren't really technically a college admission tool, there's not a single AP that can definitely get you into a school, right? I mean, there's just factors around a lot of this stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think that 3 to 5 is ideal, right? And the rest of the time should be focused on extracurriculars, to be honest.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
And you have
Sarika, one quick question.
in the chat. Hold on, just a second. You have a question in the chat before we go to your question, Conwell. So do you recommend AP classes or community college courses, which is better, or take both? So answer that one, and then we'll go to the next.
So they're both worth the same in terms of college, because a college class is itself can give you college credit. An AP class, if you do well on the AP exam, can also give you college credit. So doing them both doesn't really make sense in the whole scheme of things. whether to do a college class, and I'll get to the extracurriculars. I mean, my whole philosophy is that take what you need to do, do what you need to do academically, and then focus the rest of your time on developing as a person as a whole, because I think that looks a lot better in college admissions. Doing that one extra class in community college or one extra math class or whatever like that, unless there's something lacking in your school, I would spend the outside time on extracurriculars. So.
Okay, and then I think Anwar had
Yeah.
a question, so go ahead.
Yeah, this is really good. Thank you for taking the session. The question I had is like, so you are saying that taking an AP exam is always helpful if you get 3 to 5 points in the exam, right? One question, and the other one is, what if you take a course, say from UC Scouts or any other institute, and the kid decides not to go for the exam, but they took the course? Does it help if you just complete the course and don't take the exam? So 2 questions I have. One is like, is it worth taking the exam, even if you get you I think answered that question, that it is worth taking the exam, and even if you get 3, it helps your GPA. And the second question is, what if you take the course, you took the midterm or all did the assignments and all, does that help if you don't take the exam
So
in boosting your GPA or anything?
yeah, I mean, I think so I'll tell you, my understanding of what you're asking is that to take an AP class, so if you look at an AP class is worth the same as an honors class in high school GPA. That's the first point, right? So the only reason, and California schools are very different than Texas schools. That's one thing I learned in the last 20 years. So an AP class and an honors class are worth the same generally in terms of your GPA. They're weighted classes and they're weighted in the same way, right? And so the only difference is AP classes are a lot more work. So if you spend a year to do an AP class over an honors class and not take the exam, I think you wasted a year. I mean, maybe there's other factors that go into it, and that's a personal thing, but generally that's, you could have just done an honors thing and spent less time in the class and it would have been the same basically. So that's maybe your second question, right?
Okay. So basically you should take the exam.
You should, I mean, of course you don't want to do badly on it, but yes, okay. You should. I mean, okay. And you can actually take an AP exam and cancel it within 5 days. It won't go on your record.
Oh, that's great to know. Yeah, didn't know that.
All college board exams you can cancel within 5 days.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. And the other thing is, like, I see that there are two ways of doing it. I'm not talking about the courses offered in the school. Say like 10th grade, we don't have any AP courses in like IHS especially, right? There are other schools in FUS which offer the AP subjects, but we don't have it in IHS. So in that case, if you're taking, is it better to have a self-paced, like study yourself, or actually do it with the known institute or renowned institute like UC Scouts or something like that? Is it better to go with them and then go to the course and I mean, like, take the full course on AP, any AP which you like?
I think that's also kind of an individual decision. I'll tell you what my thoughts are on it is that, and I honestly believe that there's not a single class in college and high school that's going to make or break your admissions, right? There's not a single class that you can take that will for sure get you admission into a particular school. And so, before a child, and I've met with so many kids that are self-studying like 2 APs every year and killing themselves doing it. One recently was self-studying physics. And that's, as it is, even in school, that's a hard class, and then he was self-studying it at home. And before a child, there has to be some compelling reason to do that, I believe. Right. Before, I mean, because it's just a lot of work. Now, if a child has an affinity towards it and somehow is really good at it, and it's just an interest thing, then maybe that's a difference thing. But you have to just keep in mind that for college admissions at any of the competitive schools out there, from Stanford, all the Ivy Leagues, and any of these schools, 3 to 5 APs are actually what is considered competitive, because there's many colleges, high schools out there that don't even have access to even a fraction of what we do here in the Bay Area to begin with. So it's just something to keep in mind.
That's yeah, I really like the way you put it, because I have been hearing 8, 9 APs and all that, and then you have to do that much. But this is really good to hear that they don't have to do that many. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
If I can interject before we get to the next couple of questions. So I just want to give my personal experience. I've had 3 kids graduate from Irvington. My oldest was top 10 academically, got into Berkeley. My second one had a couple of C's in math, of all things, and she still got into Berkeley. That was a couple of years ago in 2020. And then my son, who just graduated, I think he only took 3 AP tests, and he got into Davis and Irvine, and he's going to Irvine. So I just want to say that, like, at least for my children, and I have one who's a senior who's actually applying to colleges right now, I have like the full, I would say, kind of breadth of abilities and academic capabilities, and taking APs. I mean, my oldest took all the APs there were that she could, and she worked really hard and she was really stressed out. But and then my second and third didn't, but they still got into UCs and they got into other great universities as well. So I think and I know that, Rocky, you're going to talk about it later, about your extracurriculars and leadership capabilities and leadership skills. They're super important. Writing is important. Writing essays, it's important. So I know that everyone gets stressed out about APs, but I just want to tell you that it's okay if your child does not take every single AP that's out there. They will still get into a good university. So I'm going to go to we have another question in the chat, and I don't know if you want to put a time limit on how long you want to talk about AP exams, because I know you have some other things to talk about.
Yeah, but I just have a few more slides, and then I go ahead. I think Jigar also has raised his hand.
Yeah, so Fiona asked before that, do you suggest taking 3 to AP exams instead of AP classes? And you might have touched on this already. So I'm assuming that this means that they self-studied and they're taking the exam, as opposed to taking the AP class at school and then taking the exam.
Yeah, I'll just tell you that in high school, whatever you choose to do, the philosophy for any high school student, especially in the Bay Area, is least amount of effort for the maximum benefit. That's super important. And so the self-study stuff is very common. I've met with so many kids that are doing it, and like I said, hard classes. You just have to keep in mind how much effort is going into it to do that one thing. Now in college, they have this terminology they use, this holistic college admission. Academics as a whole is only one factor. And so that really needs to be, things just need to be put into perspective. Not to say that taking APs is bad. I think that's one factor, and it should be a factor that's kind of met, but within reason, I believe. And actually I'll mention that more important than a subject, the most important thing when you take an AP is how you're going to perform on the AP exam, right? And so there, like I said earlier, that there's not a single AP that's going to make or break your college admissions. Do the classes based on whether you're going to do well or not. And I know that's a really hard thing to say, and I hate to say this as an Irvington High School parent myself, but classes should be picked based on teachers as much as possible. I know that's super hard in the public school system, but it's something to keep in mind. And it's something I honestly believe that you want to make sure that, whatever you do, you're maximizing benefit for the least amount of effort. So, putting a child through stress or whatever should be minimized as much as possible. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm trying not to be too direct about what I'm trying to say, but yeah. Jigar, did you have a question?
Yes, I had a question actually. This is about, again, you said 3 to 5 APs, but that I attended another panel somewhere, and it was mostly those students who got admission, and they were in Stanford and UC Berkeley, and they were saying that college admissions, AP, they look at number of APs and that gives you a weightage. And that's the message they were giving at that time. You know, my daughter is in junior, right? And what you are saying is very contrary to whatever we heard so far. And I don't know whether these messages are reaching to the kids, because these kids are under tremendous pressure right now, and they are like in the AP race.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. It's not a subject of this probably webinar, but how do we make this, you know, reach to the kids, especially coming from some third parties? Because if we say that, they won't believe it, because they are seeing all their friends doing the same thing.
Well, I think like something like this, having the kids attend, right, and explain to
Yeah.
them what the process is. I mean, there are isolated examples of people who did 10 APs and got into like 3 schools or 5 schools. But as Faria mentioned, right, there's also the other side that doesn't get talked about, that kids who do minimal APs are well-rounded, have done, you know, other things in their lives, and they get into the same type of schools, right? And college admissions itself is kind of a toss-up, right? I mean, it's sorry to say.
That seems like the case. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
all over the place.
right. I mean, the goal is to minimize their stress. You know.
Right. That makes sense. And I think I don't know who was talking, but they mentioned that there are 3 kids going through like different levels of AP and still getting into the same university. So I'd be curious to know like what was that well-rounded you know, thing which got them into admission from their perspective. Of course, we don't know the college perspective, but I'm very curious to know a little bit more about it.
About the kids that get into certain schools and all?
Yeah, no, like, you know, somebody just gave an example, right? That don't stress out. One of my kids took like 3 APs, one kid did more, and all of them got into UCs. And those with the minimal APs, you know, what kind of tilted in their favor if it is not APs, right? What tilted the scale in their favor? If somebody took 3 to 4 APs and still got into UC Berkeley, what happened? How did that happen, and what did they do? Because I've never heard that so far, and I'm not saying that I've heard to a lot of people, but everybody says like 7, 8, 9 APs if you want to get into UC Berkeley or Stanford. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance. And then I'm hearing that somebody got in. Like, I'm trying to figure out how.
Sorry, I don't know if you wanted to answer that, or we can go through the activities and then come back to it.
You know, I think that honestly, the essay is really important. So writing a very good essay that's compelling, and that, you know, and there are a lot of examples on you could Google examples of good essays that have been written. The other thing is your activities. I mean, my son, the one, you know, who just got in, he took 3, I think he only took 2 or 3 AP tests. And they were not math and science, by the way. I think he only took 1 science one. And he, you know, he is doing what he wants to do at UC Irvine, but he stuck with an activity. So he was, for example, in student leadership. So he's been in student leadership all 4 years of high school. And the other thing he did was soccer. So it's not like he had a lot of activities, but the activities that he did, he stuck with. So I think like that's really important. From what I can tell, colleges don't want to necessarily see 15 activities. They want to see, how did you grow in whatever activity you started. For example, my son, he started out on the JV soccer team, then he made it to varsity, and then, you know, he was in varsity for 2 years. You know, he started out as a committee member in ASG, but then he became vice president, you know, stuff like that. So they want to see your growth. I think that's really important to see, like, consistency and growth. If you just say, oh, I've been in, you know, say computer science club for 4 years, but what did you do there? Did you actually do something there? And then can you demonstrate that in your application? So I would say that was really important for my children. Of course, everyone is different. I encourage them all to just go to UCs because it's way cheaper to go to UC than a private school. So yes, they applied to private schools and they did get into private schools, but the cost was just astronomical. So I think like the education you get is at a UC, any UC, I would say, by the way, you know, in terms of, except for UC Merced, I'm sure it's good. I just don't know much about it. But the other UCs, UC Riverside, UC Santa Barbara, San Diego, Irvine, Davis, you know, Santa Cruz, they're all good. Everyone talks about Berkeley, but all of the UCs are really good. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Yep.
Thank you for answering. But can I ask a follow-up question? And you mentioned essays, and I'm hearing that, you know, like, especially in Irvington, like 90% of the kids are hiring people to write essays, and they are writing essays for them. And I don't know how do colleges know about it, because this is not expression of kids at all. It's expressions of some professional writer who are writing and making kids look like what they are not. And how does that work?
I really hope that's not true, because I can tell you that for my kids who are currently in college, they have to do a lot of writing. And if you did not write your own essay and then you go into college, you cannot have somebody write your assignments for you when you're there. So I think that the parents and students who are having someone else write their kids' essays is doing them a disservice in the long run, because at least for my son, he has to do a lot of research and he has to do a lot of writing, because that is his major. And I will also add, on the side note, the Quest project is an excellent, which is in your 12th grade, and we will, you'll find out more about it as your student gets older in Irvington, but is an excellent practice for college, because 2 of my son's classes are basically, he just said it's basically a Quest project. And so that skill set that you're getting, the soft skills, is invaluable. And so yes, we focus a lot on the STEM and the math and science, but these soft skills are what are going to get our kids through, college and then in their career path, because that is what hiring managers are looking at as well. So yeah. I'm gonna let Rocky go. It's already been an hour, so I appreciate everyone sticking with us. So I want to make sure you can wrap up your presentation.
Yeah.
Maybe hold questions until the very end.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. So now as far as and exactly what Faria said is awesome. That there are the extracurricular activities, I think, are a main part of this whole thing, and it's something that really should be focused on by the kids. In fact, I would say there are 2 types of activities that every kid really needs to look into. One are traditional extracurricular activities, and the second are career-related activities. And what I've seen is that kids will do the extracurricular stuff, but they'll completely miss out on the career-related stuff. And I'll take you through both of them and how to think about them. But extracurricular are things like dance, sports, all the traditional stuff. And as Faria said, you're really defined not by quantity, but more by quality, right? The growth from activity through the various activities. I mean, so if you have played a sport, right, and you have competed in it, and then you join the JV and the varsity, you're captain of the team, or you're then teaching younger kids how to play, or we've had kids who will create apps based on the sport, or take it to another level. But any activity that a child is involved with is measured not by the number of activities, but the growth within those activities. And those, if there's a lot of, if there's pretty good growth, then the applications become much easier, the essays become much easier, everything then kind of flows. The second type of activity, which I think most kids tend to miss out on, is the career-related stuff. And this is like, the technology or engineering, business, and law. And this is kind of where these web series hopefully will add some value to them. But those are really defined by, they don't expect them to have experience in law or medicine or engineering, but they do expect them to have explored these things, so that, when you put together your application, you should have a basis for why you want to do. A lot of the essays and all I've seen is you'll say, why do you want to be a doctor? And the kids will say, well, I want to be a doctor because my grandmother got sick and she was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And I really talked to the doctors a lot during that time. And it was fantastic. That's that's a very common thing that kids say. Almost, I would say 70% of the essays that I've ever looked at have some form of that. And it's very weak. But it becomes a lot stronger. You say, well, I had this interest, I explored it, I did research in this area, I interacted with these doctors, I got involved in this project. Or whatever it is, right? But this idea of exploration to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are, what you like and what you don't like, that then gives you a whole added dimension to your application. And I'll add one other thing to this whole thing is that, I don't know how many people have their kids in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, but even the Irvington, the Quest projects and the Change projects, actually, one thing those things do really, really well, which I think everyone should emulate in their own life, whether it's through the Scouts or not, is this idea of picking a project and defining it and implementing it, right? The level of skills that are developed through that is amazing, right? And so I think especially for kids that are between junior and senior year, whatever extracurriculars and all that they've involved in, whatever career-related stuff they've explored, but in that year, they really should figure out what one thing they want to do and build on it. I'll give you a couple of examples of kids that have gone to some of the top schools in a second, but I wanted to go through this next slide real quick, which is on the career-related stuff. There are 4 things that I think all kids, and I've done this with my eldest as well, but is that all of them should be asked to write down 5 or 7 majors that they would consider, right? Radiology or electrical engineering or marketing or law or whatever it is, and then one by one, force them to research a major. What does it entail? What's involved in that major? What type of lifestyles do they lead? What type of classes do they have to take? What does their daily life look like? Where do they live? What companies do they work for? Things like that. If they like that, then you ask them to reach out to professionals. Like we had a girl, she went to Harker and she was interested in radiology. So she sent a letter to 10 different radiologists in the Bay Area. Said, I just wanted to talk to you for 5 to 7 minutes. I just want to explore, what does a radiologist do? And she had like 3 or 4 of them that wrote back to her and said, yeah, I'd love to spend some time with you, right? And then if you like that, then you ask them those particular professionals to shadow them. And if you like that, then you ask them if you can volunteer or intern, right? And so just following this process or forcing them to go through this process makes the whole thing much easier when they have to do the college admissions applications and things like that. Now, I mentioned just a few minutes ago about having a project, right? Which is what Faria said is exactly right. The change part of the Quest project. And these things actually help you, conceptualize something, define it, follow through, manage your time, help manage other people, and work in a team when you don't really have control over anything that they care about, right? I mean, whether it's money or grades or whatever like that, to be able to get someone to work with you on something is a very valuable skill. And so this, especially junior and senior year, every child, should come up with their projects outside of the Quest or outside of any of what I've talked about. Come up with an independent project, define it, and implement it. Now, whether it's successful or not is not even the question. It's a question of that process, and that itself is one valuable story, to talk about. And I'll tell you, so like there were 2 girls that they were good friends of mine. Their parents were good friends of mine, and they, in 9th grade, one of them went to India in Bengal in Calcutta. She started she was volunteering there every summer. They were volunteering at one of the ashrams that was there. And that summer, this was summer after 9th grade, she started, she reached out to one of the schools in that city and she asked if she could Skype with them every night. So every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, which was 8:30 or 9:30, whatever in India, she would Skype with the class. She did that all through 10th grade. And then, by 11th grade, she had that summer after she did a fundraiser to raise money, and she bought the whole class computers, new computers. Then the next year she expanded it. So she had 2 friends that were doing Wednesday and Thursday night, right? And so she had this process, and whether it was by design or just happened, but she had a really interesting, a very powerful story. And her sister, they both went to St. Francis. When her sister got there, she just kind of took over. Both actually graduated from Stanford recently. There was another kid who went to Carnegie Mellon. But what he did in high school was in 10th grade, he decided, or 9th or 10th grade, he decided he was going to pick a charity and do a huge fundraising thing. And so he picked a charity for girls, for underprivileged girls in a place in Africa. And he decided he was going to raise $20,000. He went on all the African radio stations and reached out to all the community members, and he raised the money that he needed to raise. He had this whole thing at the end of his 11th grade year where he gave it to them. He flew out to this place in Africa, videotaped the whole groundbreaking, and put it on YouTube. And that was his whole personal project, right? And there's like so many of these things. I mean, at this point, they can do anything, and whether it's small or big, it's an idea of. It's this whole idea of coming up with an idea, defining it, implementing it. And at that point, the sky's the limit, right? But those type of things are super powerful. And I think that's, you know, what Fire was saying about the Quest project, it's kind of the same concept, right? This change project I see where they're having to come up with their own idea, work in a team and implement it. Those type of skills are actually, and I keep telling my own daughter, like, you can do anything, and just, you can fail, it doesn't matter, but just do it. And I think that's really the lesson for our kids, is that whatever mistakes you're going to make them now. Right? Whoever you need to interact with and talk to them now, so that you understand things a little bit better when you get to college. So that's it. I'm so sorry. I think we went over, but here's my contact information, my cell phone number. If I can help with anything, or you know, and kids, if any of the kids ever need help in our community, I'd be more than happy to help. But the other reason I'm giving my contact information is that, you know, starting from November. So November, we have a panel of doctors. We have 3 doctors that have agreed to be a part of it. And then in December, I've already finalized 2 lawyers. And then, you know, accordingly, in January, February, March, I just want to explore various majors so that kids can ask questions. They can find out what's those majors or those careers involved. And I would love to have, you know, 3 or 4, 5 students that would be willing to kind of help in this process of identifying people in the community that can be a part of this panel and that can, you know, interact with the Irvington kids. So if any kids are interested in joining this or being a part of it, please have them email me or call me. And then the next one is actually planned for the 15th of November, which is a Tuesday as well at 6 o'clock. Yeah, so I guess at that point, yeah, we can open it up. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. Yeah.
So I just want to add a couple of things that PTSA is doing to support. So we are going to be running practice SAT and ACT. They're going to be virtual tests. It's right now it's scheduled for the week of Thanksgiving, which I know that is everyone is on vacation. However, the students have the whole week to do it. They actually have 10 days to complete the exam. They can do one or both. I will be sending out a link pretty soon, probably next week. There is a cost to participate. It's a fundraiser. The money goes towards senior scholarships for our students. But you know, of course, if someone has any kind of financial needs, we can, of course, you know, help you out in terms of offering a scholarship. And the tests are run by Princeton Review. It's scored immediately. So as soon as you finish the exam, you do have to do it in one sitting. However, you can't like do a little bit every day. You get an exam and then an analysis of the wrong answers. So that is coming up. And then we will be holding in-person ACT and SAT practice tests in the spring. Details to follow on the dates. We try to align it with when the real SAT and ACT are coming up, and we do it like about a month in advance so that the students have time to, you know, see what they got wrong, and then they have time to study before they take the real one. I believe that was, I had something else and I lost it, but it'll come to me later. Look out for emails. If you know, I really thank all of you for attending today. Thank you, Rocky, for putting this together. This was amazing information. You know, even though I've had 3 kids go through this process, I still learned something. So I really appreciate your time and your effort. And then if you are not a PTSA member, please become a PTSA member. You know, we can only offer these kinds of programs for free because, you know, we rely on donations too, so that we can support our students. So I appreciate everyone. And let's see if there are any questions in the chat. I don't think there are. But somebody has the hand raised. MM.
Yes, I had a question for you. You mentioned that you're going to send out an email for PSATs. Is that for, like, let's say a 9th grade student for October? Are they going to be able to take it, or is this only for like 10th grade and higher?
So the practice SAT is not the same as the PSAT that Rocky talked about. It's literally a SAT. It's an old SAT that we're running a practice on, and it's open to everyone. So anyone, in fact, 7th grade and up can take it. You know, I think 9th and 10th graders, it's perfect for them because it's a way for them to practice taking the SAT or ACT, and they get an idea of the look and feel of the questions as well as the timing. So it's like a 3-hour test. You have to, you know, the first one we're doing is virtual, so it's not exactly like it because they can probably do it while they're sitting in bed. However, the ones that we're going to be running in the spring will be on campus at school, and it'll be more like a real one where we have a proctor, there's a timer, they're sitting in an uncomfortable chair, you know, all of that stuff that you know, the kids have to do when they take the real one. So I just want to clarify that when I say practice SAT, it's not the same thing as the PSAT, which is actually, it's also a practice SAT, but it's a different test.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Yeah. And so your email will say how to register for it, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a Google form. There's a, you know, you will have to pay something, fee to take it. Again, the money goes, it's a fundraiser for senior scholarships. And then there's pay by PayPal. And then all the instructions will be in there, but basically Princeton Review, our contact there will email everybody the link to the student portal, and then give you all sorts of other resources that your child can go look at before they take the test. If there are no other questions, I'm actually going to end it. Thank you again to everybody. I'm going to try and upload this video on YouTube and also send an email out. And it will also be on our PTSA website. You can access the PTSA website from the main Irvington High School website. And I believe there's a tab that says Parents and Teachers, and at the bottom it says PTSA, and it goes to our website. So thank you again to everyone.
Can I ask one last question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I was driving. Okay,
Yeah.
so the question is, she did answer earlier, but I didn't hear it because there was interruption with my internet. So should the student take AP class over community college courses, or she does not recommend it?
Oh, Raki, you can answer that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so both are fine. I mean, I think, you know, if they can take in a community class without really interfering in any of the other stuff that they're doing, then that's fine. But you don't need to do the AP exam and a college credit class. I mean, unless there's some, like if you go to the UC Berkeley website and they'll tell you what credit you'll get for a college class versus an AP exam. Depending on that, you can decide whether to do an AP exam itself. But whether you do the AP course or you do a college class, they're both worth the same in terms of, you know, what happens in college.
Got it. But if you were to take, what happens if you take like maybe 2 AP classes and then maybe take 1 community college? Is that good enough? Yeah,
that's okay. I mean, basically the APs are basically to show how you've challenged yourself in terms of a college curriculum.
Got it.
I do want to add something about college classes. So if you do take a class at Ohlone, for example, not all Ohlone colleges classes are going to show up on your high school transcript. For example, to graduate from FUSD, you need 4 years of math. I think it's 4 years, it might be 3 because they changed it recently, but say you need 4 years of math. If your community college math class is not, if you're not getting double credit as in FUSD, it's not going to show up on your transcript. And so I know that for any community college class, the principal has to approve it. And so if the principal approves it, you will get credit, but always check with the counselor and the school to make sure your child is going to get credit for it with FUSD. And then in addition, when you do apply to colleges, you can always submit choose transcripts. So you can submit your high school transcript and your Ohlone college transcript if you take classes.
And you actually are required to do that.
Yeah. So even if you don't get credit in FUSD, say you take some other course, like some vocational training class, like, you know, I don't know, radiology, intro to radiology or something. I'm making something up, but you want to get some kind of credit, you can always submit both transcripts. But definitely before you take an Ohlone class, especially the language classes, make sure that it's approved by FUSD, because otherwise your kid is going to have to take, you know, double the course load. So always check with the counselor, because I don't know what all the latest, I'm not up to date on all the latest requirements on all of that. So.
And I've actually heard from a lot of the Fremont kids that they don't approve it easily. The college classes, you're doing it really as kind of a supplement to the whole thing, because the FUHC is very strict about allowing a lot of that stuff onto their transcripts. It's just not common, actually. You know, having interacted with kids across the Bay Area, Fremont is very strict on a lot of things that a lot of the other districts are not so strict on.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to lobby with the district to make sure that they have a stronger relationship with Ohlone so that we get more credit. It makes no sense not to have the students get credit. So, you know, it might take a couple of years, but I've been like, you know, talking to a lot of the district personnel and board members about this.
Yeah, because Cupertino, San Ramon, a lot of these other districts do not have nearly as many restrictions on a lot of the stuff.
Yeah. It would make things easier. I actually think that the stress level would go down.
Right.
Yep. All right, I'm going to end the meeting. It's 7:19. So thank you, everybody. And have a great night.
Thank
Thank you, Rocky.
Thank you, Priya. Okay. All right, bye.
Thanks.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Yep.
Thanks.